As healthcare professionals, you are often trained to leave your feelings at the door when you are working with patients. It's something that you're trained to do since when you do your education. And I'm here to tell you that that's not only unrealistic, it's actually doing a disservice to your patients. One of the many areas of emotional intelligence that has really been up and coming in the field of communication and in general is the importance of emotional regulation. Despite it being such a vital survival skill for us to function and thrive as human beings, it's unfortunately a skill that is not taught to us by our parents, by the school, by educational institutions, by anybody. However, there are some tools and strategies that you can incorporate as a human being, as a healthcare professional, to develop the skills for emotional regulation. So in this video, I'm going to try my best to educate you on how to do just that. Back to my channel, everybody. Thank you very much for your ongoing support, presence, and engagement. My name is Shweta. I'm the founder of Healthy Dynamics. We are a coaching practice that helps healthcare professionals who don't speak English as their first language, but they speak it at an intermediate level, so they're somewhat fluent at it. They are either living in a country where English is the first language and are therefore working with patients whose English is their first language, or they're in an environment where there are English as a first language speakers, patients, and they want to develop and improve their communication skills, and so that they can connect and collaborate better with their patients, achieve professional excellence, progress in their career, and build trust, authority, and impact with their patients. So if you fall under one of these categories, you've absolutely come to the right place. So like I mentioned in the very beginning of the video, we're going to be discovering the concept of emotional regulation in more detail in this video. Now, even though emotional regulation is closely intertwined with emotional intelligence, and I have made videos about this in the past, which I will link towards the very end of this video, it deserves a platform and some more attention in isolation in and of itself. Now, I'm going to leave a little quote over here on the Warp Brain Journal, and it talks about why emotional regulation is so fundamental that if, as humans, we develop it, it will solve 90% of the world's problems. And emotional regulation is just as vital when it comes to communication. Currently, I'm reading the book Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. I'm going to do a separate video on that in a couple of weeks' time on how to be a super communicator. But I just wanted to share with you this one little excerpt on emotions that he mentions in this book. And this book is something I'd highly recommend to everybody who wants to become a better communicator. There's so many nuggets of wisdom in this book that I will be covering in my videos and in my content as well. But going back to emotional regulation, what is it? So let's kind of start with that. Your emotional regulation is your ability to stay grounded and calm during difficult conversations and challenging situations, navigate your emotional triggers. So being aware of what emotions you experience or what events that trigger you, and what emotions you experience as a result of that, and how you're able to respond appropriately, respectfully, instead of reacting. Now, what emotional regulation does not mean is suppressing or numbing your feelings. That, unfortunately, as a child, and I in particular, that's how I was raised, that I could, even though I was a very sensitive child, I could never express myself. I could, when I did do so, it was always considered like an inconvenience for everyone around me. It used to make a lot of my family members very upset. And so I was conditioned from a young age to really suppress and hold back my emotions. And so, I obviously bottled it all up. And so when it came out in a very negative manner, in a toxic manner, in a sometimes it was aggression, it was not violence, but it was a lot of anger and a lot of bitterness, and it was never a pleasant experience for anybody. So really, emotional regulation is about understanding your own emotions, but without letting them hijack or dictate your communication. Now, let me just go back to my own life before we go into the importance of why emotional regulation matters in healthcare. So like I mentioned, as a child, I was very bad at emotional regulation. And you can't really blame me because, it's something that my parents didn't really have a full understanding of. Not to mention the fact that I grew up in a culture, like I've mentioned before, where women were not really allowed to have a say. It was hierarchical, it was patriarchal, all that stuff. So as a child, I was conditioned to be this very compliant, conforming good girl, and deferring, a term that's used by millennials quite often. And basically the expectation on me was to just be polite, to not speak out of turn, to suppress what I felt and avoid making others uncomfortable, like I mentioned in the very beginning. And when I started working in corporate during my very early days, this conditioning actually made me come across as being very detached, even though I actually cared very deeply. So even though it looked like I seemed like I was always in very controlled emotionally, but I had this poker face on me all the time. People didn't really know how I felt because I was very monotonous that way. And also I didn't really have the skills of how to relate and connect with people on a deep emotional level. So my communication skills, that's why I grew up being a very poor communicator as a child. So when I used to get that feedback, it hit me really hard. So the fact that I was hiding and numbing and suppressing my emotions, it was not me being professional. It was actually becoming a barrier for me to connect and communicate with clients and colleagues in a much more deeper and meaningful manner. However, over time and going to therapy and a lot of work I've done on myself, I actually learned how to name and identify my emotions using appropriate vocabulary. Again, this is something we're not taught as children, unfortunately. So instead of burying them and just not worrying about it, I actually gave my emotions not just the proper vocabulary name, but just a name in general. I paused before I responded, and I acknowledged what people, patients, clients, colleagues, whoever they were feeling without taking it personally. And that is what shifted in me to how people responded to me, and I really improved the ways in which I connected with the people around me. Now let's go into why emotional regulation matters so much in healthcare. Now we all know that whether you're a therapist, whether you are a geriatrician, whether you're a nurse, whatever your role is in healthcare, the emotional regulation really affects the tone in which you use, that you're using when you're speaking to patients, the way you deliver difficult, challenging news, and how a patient feels safe with you, how much they can trust you, how much they can open up to you or confide in you. Because like I've mentioned many, many times before, patients don't just remember what you said to them verbally. They remember how they made you feel. And this is done by all the non-verbal cues that we talk about all the time on this channel. And often how you feel inside, anxious, overwhelmed, distracted, it's going to show up in your communication if you don't regulate your emotions properly. And even if you do a very good job of disguising it, burying it, numbing it like I used to do in the past, when it does come out, it is like an explosion. And it just becomes a very unpleasant experience for everybody. And as I said before, the body always keeps score and it never lies. Again, it's a book that I've read that I'm going to again be talking about a lot of the lessons in that book on this channel as well in the future. But going back to the point, if your body language is tight, if your voice is rushed, if your tone is monotonous, if your facial expressions are blank, your patients will notice that, and they will just leave the consultation thinking that I was not heard, I was not cared about, I was not valued. But it's not true. It's because your body is giving out signals and signs you are actually suppressing, doing a very good job of doing. If you want to learn more about this mind-body regulation and why being in touch with your emotions is so vital, not just for survival but also thriving, I would highly recommend you check out Connie Bazalski. I've been following her work for quite a few years now, and she's absolutely amazing. So whilst I'm not a therapist, I'm not I don't work in that sort of space. I am a coach, but I don't do that type of coaching, but I can definitely direct you to some resources, and you can always seek therapy on something that if you feel that this is a skill that you can get help in, or any sort of alternative coaching. So what does emotional regulation look like when I work with English as a healthcare professionals, English as a second language healthcare professionals? So just like me, these professionals are also have been conditioned to see the emotions in sort of a negative way, almost like it's a weakness. It's like, you know, you're not going to really be taken seriously or respected if you are if you show any emotion. I remember Dr. Amir, whom I'm a big fan of, he has, in some of his TikToks, he does mention, you know, and he's asked his audience this question as well, that, you know, when I am euthanizing a pet, I find it very hard to hold my emotions back, and I sometimes I feel like crying along with the client, but I feel that it's unprofessional in order to do that. And I've always left comments on his TikTok saying that's just you being human, and it's one way in which the client would absolutely trust you, and they will remember how you made them feel during that really difficult period. So again, going back to that example, so if you have been raised in a hierarchical or high context culture where speaking up or speaking softly is valued over speaking up, deference, like I mentioned in the very beginning, is expected, conformity and compliance is everything, and conflict is really feared. So when they interact with Western patients, or patients who speak English as a first language, who expect openness and transparency and being direct, that's the norm, there's an immediate disconnect, and that leads to an absolute communication breakdown. And so what you really need to do is hold space for not only, you know, being aware and managing your own emotions and your response, and letting them guide you in the way that you communicate and how you show up, not just in a constructive way or you know, just putting on a front, but also just you keeping it completely real. You also hold space for what your patients feel and their emotions as well. And you also, in the process, you also end up using validating language, things like, you know, this must be incredibly difficult or challenging for you. And also, you know, when you do that, you know, your body language just automatically and very unconsciously changes, and patients really get to see that, you know, this person sees where I'm coming from, because regulated emotions don't create that disconnect that you do when your emotions are unregulated. They actually create connection. So some of the simplest ways in which you can start regulating your emotions. So like I mentioned in the very beginning, I am not a therapist, I'm not a coach in that space, so I'm just talking about what you can do just from my experience and what I've learned through therapy and coaching, and what may be useful for you as a healthcare professional. So the number one strategy that I would recommend is the name to tame method. So what I mean by this is that before you walk into any patient interaction, name how you're feeling and do it accurately. Don't just say, oh, I feel stressed, when that may not really be the case. You might feel rushed, you might feel anxious, you may feel not as focused, you may feel disconnected. Put a name to it and say it out loud. And naming emotions reduces the power that they have on you, and doing so accurately. And this is a process. Emotion regulation in general is a practice and process like any other communication skills, and it takes time and it takes repetitions to do it correctly. Check in with your body. And again, Connie Bisalsi's work is amazing in terms of that mind-body connection, so definitely check that out. So, bringing awareness to how your body is feeling, and again, how you do things like breath work, you do things like breathing exercises, many different things you can do. And when you become more aware of your body, you try to change your physiology. Because of the mind-body connection, your emotions will also be a reflection of exactly that. And the most important thing for you to remember is that being emotional is not a sign of weakness. You are human, and every human has emotions, and emotion is a way for your body and mind to tell you, sending you a message about something that needs to change, or like a trigger almost, you know, like that stimulus response model. That's what it's really your guiding force, and if you know how to regulate it properly, it can do wonders, not just for the way in which you actually show up and function in the world, but most importantly, the way in which that you communicate and the way in which that you connect with your patients. So saying things like, I see you, I'm here with you, and we'll get through this together with your patient, as a consequence of regulating your emotions, is emotional presence, not perfection. So to wrap things up, you don't have to be cold to be competent, and you should never suppress your emotions in order to be strong or to look professional. Regulating your emotions is not about being robotic, or there's no like a system for it as such, but just being aware and being human in a high pressure environment when you are connecting and working with vulnerable humans on an everyday basis. So hopefully that helped you out a little bit just from my experience and my understanding of what emotional regulation is. I'm going to leave Connie's channel and all the other resources over here for you to check out, as well as the quiz that I have put together to get you an understanding of what your default communication persona is, as well as the link to book a coaching call, a discovery call if you want to inquire more about my coaching services. All the links will be down in the description box below. To stay tuned for more content on how to become a better communicator as an ESL healthcare professional, make sure that you hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, leave your thoughts and comments and your feedback in the comment section below. And as always, thank you very much for your time, attention, and presence, and I shall see you next week.